much damage, how many calamities, disruptions, and devastations of kingdoms there have been. How many souls have perished in the Indies over the years, and how unjustly. How many unforgivable sins have been committed. Bartolomé de las Casas.
In December of 1492, 3 ships, under the command of Christopher Columbus, approached the second largest island in the Caribbean. For 8 weeks, Columbus had traveled from the Bahamas to Cuba, finally reaching the site of modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The island he would name Hispaniola. The island was then populated by people known as the Taino. Controlled by the paramount chief, Wakanagari. On Christmas Eve, while coasting along the shore, Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, ran aground. On Christmas Eve, while coasting along the shore, Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, ran aground.
When Wakanagari learned the news, he sent all his people from the town with many large canoes to unload everything from the ship. So great was the care and diligence which that king exercised, and he himself was as diligent unloading the ship as in guarding what was taken to land, in order that everything would be well cared for.
Grateful for the island leader's help, Columbus accepted his invitation to come ashore.
The admiral left to dine on shore and arrived at the time when 5 kings had come. All subject to the one who is called Wakanagari. Wakanagari came to receive the admiral as soon as he had reached land and took him by the arm.
Columbus was immediately struck by the beauty of Taino life.
The king observes a very wonderful estate in such a dignified manner that it is a pleasure to see. Neither better people nor land can there be. The houses and the villages are so pretty. They love their neighbors as themselves. And they have the sweetest speech in the world. And they're gentle, and they're always laughing. Christopher Columbus.
As a token of gratitude for the rescue of his men and supplies, Columbus presented Wakanagari with a red cape, a prestigious item among the Taino elite. In return, Wakanagari gave Columbus a golden tiara he wore on his head. To Wakanagari, it was a fair exchange, a gesture of mutual respect and recognition, the opening of trade between equals. To Columbus, it was a crown, a symbol of authority. Wakanagari was surrendering his lands and people to Spain. But Columbus was not simply looking to rule people. He saw something much more valuable to his future. He saw gold, the prize he could take back to his sponsors in Europe. There was wealth to be had, and to the Europeans of the time, wealth belonged to those strong enough to take it.
Now, I have ordered my men to build a tower and a fort. Not that I believe it to be necessary, for it is obvious that with these men that I bring, I could subdue all of this island, since the people are naked and without arms. But it is right that this tower be made, so that with love and fear, they will obey.
Leaving behind a contingent of men in a fort built from the timbers of the Santa Maria, Columbus set sail for Europe. With him, he would carry the news of a new world, gold and docile island natives. Wakanagari and the Taino had no way of knowing what was about to happen to their ancient way of life. The Taino's ancestors were part of a series of migrations of South American Indian people dating back over 2,000 years. They farmed the land and harvested the wealth of the sea. Taino traders traveled in huge ocean-going canoes capable of carrying up to 150 men. Boats laden with feathers, gold, wood, pottery, beautiful birds, cotton fabric, and food. Island nations were woven together by trade. Trade was the communication system by which nations knew one another and maintained peace. Some trading partners even exchanged their names to create lasting bonds between their communities. By the time of contact, there were well over 1 million people living in the Caribbean. Local community leaders were subject to powerful regional leaders like Wakanagari, who controlled trade with large personal fleets and warehouses of commodities. Into this world, Columbus returned in November 1493 with a military flotilla of 17 ships. Under his command were armor-clad soldiers, mounted cavalry, attack dogs, and guns. The Spanish conquest of the Caribbean began. Gold mines were opened, and the Taino were enslaved, forced to mine the ore. A Spanish priest, Bartolomé de las Casas, who accompanied Columbus on his second voyage, spoke out against the cruel treatment of the Taino people.
It is not possible to recount the 100th part of what I have seen with my own eyes. A man had need to have a body of iron to undergo the labor they endure in getting gold out of the mines. They must delve and search 100 times over in the inner parts of the mountains till they dig them down from top to bottom. They must work the very rocks hollow. Bartolomé de las Casas.
Epidemics and famine swept the island. Yet the Spanish continued to demand that the beleaguered Taino supply them with both food and labor. Garrisons were strung across the island to fortify the gold fields. When resistance sprang up, Columbus sent out military units to terrorize towns into submission.
They were so relentlessly persecuted and pursued with their wives and children up into the hills, so tired, hungry, and harassed. And there went with them disease, death, and misery, just as if they had been killed in the wars. They died of hunger and sickness that surrounded them, and the fatigue and oppression that followed. After 1496, no more than a third remained of the multitudes that had been on the island.
Taino's suffering was so severe that thousands took their own lives rather than submit.
Wherefore many went to the woods and there hanged themselves, after having killed their children, saying it was far better to die than to live so miserably. Some threw themselves from the high cliffs down precipices, others jumped into the sea, and others starved themselves to death. Benzoni, soldier for Spain.
Some escaped into the mountains, including Guacanagari, the paramount chief who had befriended Columbus. He soon died, a homeless wanderer. By 1503, 11 years after Columbus's first voyage, only a few pockets of resistance remained. In the mountainous region of Sharawa, Taino people ruled by a woman named Anacaona successfully evaded Spanish demands for labor. Determined to break the resistance, the Spanish governor requested a diplomatic meeting. Anacaona agreed and summoned 80 regional sub-chiefs to her statehouse for the meeting. When the 80 leaders were gathered inside, the governor gave a signal and a thatched statehouse was set on fire. Soldiers lined up outside with swords. Taino leaders who did not burn were killed as they fled the blaze. Anacaona was spared, only to be later executed by hanging. In the aftermath of the bloody carnage, a little boy stood among the ashes and smoke beside the charred remains of his father. A boy whose name the Spanish would come to remember well. Enrique. The child who witnessed the murder of his father and the other Taino leaders in Sharawa was taken away from the killing field by a Spanish priest. He was placed in the care of missionaries and baptized Enrique. Although raised by Spaniards, he never forgot his own identity, heir to the chiefdom of the Bahoruco region of the island.
Enrique was a tall and graceful man with a well-proportioned body. His face was neither handsome nor ugly, but that of a serious and stern man. He married a native, a woman of excellent and noble lineage, named Doña Lucia. Bartolomé de las Casas.
The Spanish government created a labor grant system under which individual Spanish landholders were given village populations to use as forced labor. Enrique, his wife, and his people were turned over to a debauched young Spaniard named Valenzuela. They were at his mercy. The priest Las Casas protested.
In a more just world, Enrique would have been the master. Valenzuela viewed Enriquillo as a slave, and valued him less than manure in the street.
Enrique complied with Valenzuela's tyrannical demands, for which he was rewarded with regular beatings and robbed of his last remaining possessions. His many appeals to Spanish authorities fell on deaf ears. When Valenzuela raped his wife, Enrique reached his breaking point. He and his followers escaped to their homelands in the lofty Bajoruco Mountains.
The Spanish came to call him the rebel Enrique, and those who followed him were termed rebels and insurgents. Although in truth they were not rebelling, but only fleeing from their cruel enemies who were misusing and destroying them, just as a cow or an ox tries to escape from the slaughterhouse. Bartolomé de las Casas.
Enrique organized his people. Women, children, and elderly were sent into caves high in the mountains, where they raised chickens and cultivated gardens to feed the resistance army. Scouts were posted on every crag and pass. Heavy boulders rolled into place above the footpaths. Enrique instructed his men to fight only in self-defense, to kill Spaniards only in the course of battle, and otherwise to simply deprive them of their arms. At first, the Spanish army was confident they would quickly crush the Taino resistance. But Enrique's people, armed only with spears, iron spikes, fish bones, and bows and arrows, fought with fierce determination against the Spanish and their sophisticated arms. Time after time, they forced the enemy to retreat. During one fierce battle, Valenzuela himself was captured. But even this mortal enemy's life would be spared. Enrique ordered him released. As word of Enrique's victories spread across the island, many Taino fled to his refuge and joined the fight for freedom. His legend grew. It was said that Enrique never slept at night, that he himself patrolled the village until dawn. For over a decade, he fought Spain to a standstill. Finally, unable to defeat the guerrillas on their own territory, an exhausted and humiliated Spanish government made overtures of peace.
I know the Spanish very well, because they killed my father and grandfather and all the people of the kingdom of Sarawak, and reduced the population of the entire island of Hispaniola. I have fled to my own land, where neither I nor any of my followers are harming anyone, but are simply defending ourselves against those who came to capture and kill us. I need not talk to another Spaniard. Enrique, Taino.
But there was one Spaniard to whom Enrique would still talk, the priest, Las Casas. After many years spent demanding the king act to stop Spanish atrocities in the New World, Las Casas had been officially designated protector of the Indians. He now sought out Enrique in his mountain stronghold. 2 months later, Las Casas and Enrique appeared before Spanish authorities and negotiated a truce. "14 years after it began, the rebellion came to an end, but only after the Spanish agreed to guarantee freedom for Enrique's people. At the base of the Cibao Mountains, Enrique settled with his 4,000 followers, the last members of a culture that had flourished for millennia. By the end of the century, the Taino population that Las Casas had estimated at 2 million was officially reported extinct.
It's the 500-year resistance. You can't break the connection. Follow? It's a 500-year-old voice.